Robert, are you with me on the line?
I am. It's good to be back.
Wow, I think I've done 160 shows since I last spoke to you, Robert. A lot has changed in the world. But I think the last time, Robert, we spoke, you were going to go and do a tour in Göbekli Tepe. I guess tell us a little bit about the Göbekli Tepe tour, what happened last year, and I believe you're going to do it again this year.
We're going to do it again this year. Yes, I've been there, I want to say 4 times or so at this point, both for my research and taking people there. Those that are not familiar with it, Göbekli Tepe is an incredible ancient megalithic site in southeastern Turkey. It is arguably the oldest, or certainly one of the oldest megalithic sites we know. Certainly the oldest megalithic site where you have beautifully carved pillars. You have these pillars that weigh 10 to 15 tons, beautifully carved with reliefs of animals on them. And the bottom line is they form sort of Stonehenge-like circles, but they date back to 12,000 years ago, so the very end of the last ice age. The general consensus, although I'm not sure if it's correct, view of Stonehenge is it only goes back about 5,000 years. Göbekli Tepe goes back more than twice that, 12,000 years. So it's an incredibly important site for pushing back the origins of civilization, not just in southeastern Turkey, not just in Asia Minor, but for the entire world. So very important, very exciting. I have never lost my enthusiasm about it. And also when we go to Turkey, and we'll be doing that again this summer, we see a number of other sites. So we start in Istanbul and we work our way across Turkey looking at various ancient sites. And it just happens to be the route we take. Essentially, we start in Roman times and we push our way back to Göbekli Tepe time. So we span over 10,000 years of ancient history in Turkey.
Wow, beautiful, Robert, beautiful. You know, I think it's one of the most exciting archaeological sites on the planet, and probably one of the most important because of the time frame that you mentioned, Robert. Let's tie it in with the book we discussed last time with solar outbursts and plasma and kind of where that all fits in.
Yeah, well, it all fits together. It ties in. I want to point out several things right now. Göbekli Tepe ties in with Egypt. And my work began in Egypt. My serious work on ancient cultures began in Egypt with the Great Sphinx. And this was very controversial, still is in some circles, very controversial that my geological analysis puts the Great Sphinx, or I would say the origins of the Great Sphinx, back to 10, 12,000 years, same time as Göbekli Tepe. I've been talking about this for 20-some years, but archaeologists, classical historians, and prehistorians, basically the status quo, they have a paradigm that no civilization, sophisticated culture did not begin until about 3,000 BC, about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. So when I was talking about ancient Egypt and the Sphinx in particular being over 10,000 years ago, going back essentially to the end of the last ice age, I was just dismissed in my academic circles as, this was lunacy, this was crazy. Actually, I should say in the Egyptological historical circles, my fellow geologists from day one when I presented this always supported me because the geological evidence is very evident and definitive. So I started with the Sphinx. Göbekli Tepe is incredible confirmation of that. But one of and I'm making a very long story short, and people can read about more in my book, Forgotten Civilization. Sure. One of the big issues for everyone, including myself, is if there were these ancient civilizations before civilization was supposed to exist, going back to what we geologically refer to as the late ice age, before the end of the last ice age, what happened to these civilizations? In fact, a more pertinent and related question for me as a geologist is what happened to the entire world that caused the ice ages to end, to cause all these animals to go extinct, to cause these early civilizations to be devastated and essentially wiped off the face of the earth. And what I've determined, and I believe the evidence is very strong for this, is that there was a major solar outburst about 9700 BC, very end of the last ice age. And I do want to say one thing before people jump on me. Yes, there's lots of evidence for a comet, but that is 10,900 BC, about 1,200 years before the end of the last ice age. The Göbekli Tepe dates to the period post-comet, post 10,900 BC, but before 9,700 BC, the earliest portions of Göbekli Tepe. So it was a very tumultuous time at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago. There had been a comet about 1,000, 1,200 years earlier, and then there was this major solar outburst that just caused incredible devastation on Earth geologically, caused the biota, the animals, the plants to be devastated, and caused these early civilizations, I believe, to essentially be thrown back to a much more primitive state, just massive destruction. So that's a short story.
Sure.
And something we'll be thinking about and talking about both on the trip to Turkey and the trip to Egypt that I'll be, I'm very excited about. Gary Evans and Patricia were doing a trip to Egypt in January. Did I get that right?
Sure. That's a good.
I love Egypt. I've been there, I don't know, dozens of times, and we'll be talking about this whole scenario and the evidence for it, and the evidence for these early civilizations as we travel through Turkey, as we travel through Egypt.
Wow, good chance to bring you Mr. Gary Evans. Gary, you're with me on the line.
I'm here.
Oh, tell us about the tour with Robert Schoch. Dr. Schoch's coming to Egypt in January, I believe. Let's give us some of the details of the tour, what people can expect to find, and why you're going to work with Robert on the tour, what you guys going to look for in the field.
Well, first of all, and probably most importantly, I should say, we've invited Robert to join us. I mean, I've been hoping to do a tour in Egypt with Robert since I started doing the tours back in 2010, because I've been a huge follower of his work. And admire it. So that was the reason for the link up, and I've been lucky to get to know Robert from being involved with the CPAC conference.
Oh, yes.
Which I'll mention later on, that we're both speaking at in October. And I mean, I've been working very closely with Patricia and her husband Yusuf in Egypt, so it just seemed like a natural collaboration, really, because there's a lot of synergies between the three of us. But it will also provide the guests joining us with a variety of perspectives. So that's kind of how it came together. Wow. The tour is January 4th to 16th, 2015, and the whole details are on my infinite-connections.co.uk website. And so we will journey the entire length of the Nile. I mean, there's so much in Egypt, but I'd say that we visit the majority of the kind of must-see sites.
Sure.
If you're going to Egypt, we try to do that. So yeah, all the way down, and even to Abu Simbel in the far south, which I haven't been to recently, but I do love it, as I believe Robert enjoys going down there as well.
There's not. Can I jump in? There's nothing bad in Egypt to see. It's all incredible.
Wow. Robert, you're probably going to see some evidence of maybe ancient technology, core drills and stuff like that. Do you look into that, Robert? Does that interest you?
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things that ties in very intimately with what I was very, very briefly discussing before, which is that these ancient civilizations, both the classical dynastic Egyptians, when I say classical dynastic, even according to the Egyptologists, they cannot explain, I'm convinced, they cannot explain how they were constructing these monuments, how they were moving these huge megalithic blocks, how they were quarrying them, how they were carving both things on a large scale and a small scale. What I mean by that is even when you look at some of the diorite or basalt vases or statues, I mean, these are absolutely staggering works of art, staggering feats of technology. And, how they were doing it supposedly, I say supposedly, without any kind of power tools, without any kind of advanced technology, essentially is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So we'll be talking about the anomalies. When I say anomalies in the standard paradigm, that sees these as a bunch of primitives versus the sophistication that is evident on site.
Sure. Let's bring in Patricia at this point. Patricia, first of all, welcome to the show.
Hi, James. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, thank you, Patricia. It's always nice to hear your voice, Patricia. Patricia, I have been on the chematology tour last year. I have seen these core drills that myself and Robert's talking about here. I'm so excited to see Robert and Yusuf, your husband, together. A big shout to Yusuf as well, because Yusuf, he knows Egypt like the back of his hand, and again, he works with the stone as well. So I can see Dr. Shock and Yusuf going to get on really well, and I think they're going to at least bring a lot of more knowledge to the forefront. Is that the aim of Yusuf's collaboration?
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how excited both Yosef and I are to be working with Robert. We love you, Gary, and enjoy working with you, but we've been so looking forward to working with Robert. And yes, Yosef has a long list of special little unique things that he wants to show Robert. We have lots of questions for you as well. It's going to be a very exciting adventure.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to it, and it's going to be a great opportunity for those people joining us on this trip to see these things firsthand and as we're looking at them.
Absolutely. You were here and met Hakeem, Yosef's father, in 2004, weren't you?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So I met in his father, which is, I'm sorry he's passed away now.
Yes, sadly.
But yeah, so I'm very excited about continuing the studies and.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, no matter I want to get back to Egypt. The day after I get back from a trip, I want to go back again.
Yeah. I live here now.
You're lucky.
Wow. Patricia, on the chematology tour, when I was there, I seen stuff with my own eyes that as an engineer, I just couldn't believe. I really just couldn't believe it, Patricia. Maybe just talk about what we're looking at here. Ancient acoustics knowledge, ancient technology, spirituality. Give us an idea of what people were going to touch on this tour.
There is so much that we're going to cover, all of those things that you mentioned. We'll be taking you to the Serapeum. It was just opened to the public 2 years ago after being closed for many years. I call this the biggest smoking gun on the planet, and pictures just don't do it justice. When you enter this yourself, it's just mind-blowing what you will experience. And again, people try and tell us that this is a facility. It's a subterranean facility with a hallway that's flanked by small rooms, rooms that have up to 20 to 60 ton boxes, granite boxes in them that are just beyond explanation. We will show you things out in the field, the pyramids themselves. The Sphinx, we'll have lots to discuss. We have private entries. We'll have 2 hours of private time at the Sphinx to hear how Robert's story about seeing it for the first time and what he can tell us about it today, as well as our own theories. We'll have 2 hours of private time in the Great Pyramid, where we'll hopefully, and we've been able to in the past, open all 3 chambers so people can go into the subterranean and the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber, sometimes all at the same time.
Oh, how beautiful.
And then aside from all this, I could go on for hours at all the sites we'll be seeing and the temples and, of course, the 5-star luxurious Nile cruise and but we'll also have many lectures along the way. Robert will be lecturing, Gary, Yosef, and Mohammed Ibrahim, our expert Egyptologist tour guide, as well as myself. And Gary and I will be leading people through meditations. Gary, Yosef, and I will be talking about the resonant toning, as you mentioned, James, in some of these subterranean chambers and in the King's Chamber, and even in the boxes in the Serapeum, this resonant tone that actually affects the energetic makeup of your body, mind, and spirit. I'll be lecturing about the mythologies and the symbolism and how the ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses were never meant to be worshipped as gods as we see them, but were were actually called netters, based on the hieroglyphs that we get the consonants NTR for, our base word for nature, nurture, eternal, natal. They were aspects of nature or cosmic forces, and together they combine to form a map of the nature of our reality, of our environment, our natural world. There's so much, just so much we'll be talking about.
Wow, this sounds like a philosophical think tank, guys.
Well, I want to say it's probably a philosophical think tank and also a scientific think tank. Something that comes to mind, I'm fairly well versed in Schwaller de Lubitsch.
Oh, yes, Robert.
And, Schwallerian terms, sacred science, where you're combining the two, and they're not antithetical to each other. They're not antagonistic, but in fact, the spirituality and the deep true science go hand in hand.
Sure. I just introduced somebody to Magical Egypt, the Symbolist Tour, Dr. John West's DVD box set the other day, and they're so gobsmacked with Schwaller de Lubitsch and his achievements. What a great man, Robert. What an awesome intellectual.
Schwaller was incredible.
Ahead of his time.
And and ahead of his times, and he was a true practicing alchemist on top of everything else. I mean, a real Renaissance man who lived in the 20th century. So I'm not saying, again, I want to make it clear, I'm not a Schwallerian in the sense that I don't take everything dogmatically from anyone, but certainly Schwaller has a lot to offer, so we'll be talking about bringing that in too.
Wow. How's John West doing?
He's a very close friend of mine.
Sure.
So I can bring, how should I say, we've I don't know, I've known him for, quarter century.
Wow. And he's still going, John, isn't he?
Say it again?
John West, he's still going today.
He's still going. Well, what do you mean by going? He's still alive.
Well, I mean, still going on tours, I think.
He's going on tours, although I think he's got he's not a young man.
Wow, he's a great.
But he and I actually traveled to Norway together. He and I and my wife, Katie, went to Norway this past summer. We gave some lectures there at a conference. So, he's doing well. He's
That's great.
I'll jump in just quickly, if I may, on the Schwaller side of things.
Oh, for sure, Gary.
Well, because my perspective on the tour is trying to help people actually experience these sites as perhaps they were once experienced, which means kind of getting out of this rational, analytical mindset that we use for driving and using the computers. So I've spent a lot of time at Luxor Temple, which is the site that Schwaller spent so long at, and I've spent enough time there to know that anyone that spent 15 plus years at Luxor Temple and started talking about this kind of heart-based emotional intelligence, as he's written, I'm going to pay serious attention to that individual, because if I can have these amazing experiences at Luxor from such short visits and sporadic visits, somebody that is there for so long, I mean, he must have just gone really, really deep into the realms that the ancient Egyptians were dealing with. That's what he's showing us, and he's writing. It is quite hard work. I mean, his work is one of the few that I could start reading the page, and even though I've read so much and discussed so many subjects with amazing minds, I could read a page of his, and he's just going to give me bam, 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 deep thought after deep thought after deep thought, and I could spend like 10, 15 minutes thinking of each of these points on a page. So it is something that it will take time to work through, but I think it can be very rewarding for those that are sort of the mindset to look at his work. But Luxor Temple is one of the most powerful places I've ever visited, so I think he fixated on it for a very good reason. And we will do our best, even in the short time we have there on the tour, to immerse ourselves, because it is so powerful. We've had some really strong positive reactions on the tours. Guests walk in, and as they're leaving, one lady was breaking into tears on one of the tours because it just felt so good to be there. So that's the kind of things we'll also look at.
Well, I have you there, Gary. You mentioned CPAC. Let's talk about what CPAC is, the Conference for Possession and Ancient Knowledge, and you're speaking at it as well as promoting, Gary. You have your foot in, both worlds.
Well, CPAC's in Palm Springs. So next month, 17th to the 19th, and it's run and organised by Walter Crussenden and his lovely family. I mean, these things do take a lot of effort from a team, and I've been working with Walter since 2010. I think Robert was connected to him before that, but he's been like a mentor to me. He's very wise and has a huge depth of knowledge, and really does inspire a lot of people and do a lot of good work. And CPAC it's designed to kind of bridge the gap as best as you can between you could say the sort of normal mainstream reality or perspective and the kind of alternative world. So we've got a lot of scientists speaking. So it's cpaconline.com, and you can see the 2014 presenters there. So Robert and I are both speaking this year. We've got a good size audience already, and hopefully some more people will decide to join us. Lovely warm location, and really good family feel there. A lot of interaction with the speakers and the guests. There's a meet and greet on the Friday evening, so people get a chance to interact with their favourite presenters and question them to their heart's content.
Wow. So you're going to talk about connecting the source at ancient sites, Gary, is that correct?
Yeah, well, we're going to look at some of the latest science coming out in terms of the acoustics.
Wow.
Because it's not just about hypotheticals. This could be. The CPAC conference is about this cycle of consciousness that it's called the Yuga cycles, 24,000 year cycle that Plato called the sort of thing, like the Great Year, which is the documentary Walter Crussenden also made. And I'm going to look at the latest science emerging from Stanford, UCLA, and a number of universities in Europe about the effects of sound on the brain, which these different frequencies do. They can see on the EEG that different parts of the brain are lighting up, and we're starting to see from the science how you can reach what we would have called mystical states or altered states of consciousness. And I would say it's a safe method. There are various ways of changing into these altered states of consciousness. Working with sound, I think, is very gentle. I mean, it's something we can take at our own pace. On the tours, people are there for different time periods according to their needs. So it's exciting times, and it ties into something I've been discussing with Robert, this TV show, which is what I've been working on a lot since we last spoke. So it's about how place and sounds can affect our states of mind, and how we can really understand the natural world in a different way, and perhaps start to see it through the eyes of our ancestors and what they were really doing with some of these powerful ancient sites.
Wow, beautiful, Gary, beautiful. Let me just bring Patricia in a second. Patricia, I believe we've got you just before you go to Peru. You're on a Peru tour pretty soon with, I think, Brian Forster as well.
Yes, we leave in late Tuesday night for Peru and Bolivia with Brian Forster and Stephen Mailer.
Wow. So you're going to be looking at the same thing. You're going to look for similarities in Egypt and Peru, ancient technology.
We are. We brought Brian and Stephen here on a tour, technology and spirituality, ancient advanced technologies and spirituality tour for 2 years now. And Brian has said, okay, now it's time to bring the Egypt experts to Peru so that we can compare and contrast with what we find in both locations. So we're very excited. We've seen a lot of Brian's videos. We've heard him tell us and lecture about some of these sites and the things he's finding there. And we couldn't be more excited to be viewing all of this with our own eyes.
Wow, beautiful. So you've got quite a busy few months coming up, Patricia. You've got, obviously, Christmas, but, I mean, you've got, tour in January with Robert, then you've got the other one with Stephen, the chematology tour in March as well, is that correct?
In March, and in February we are working with Australian original elder Uncle Doug Williams. He's a senior custodial elder for the east coast of Australia, as well as Stella Wilden and Sonia Van Gelder.
Wow.
Experts on the mythology, symbolism, the lore there, and we're going to be also discussing ancient connections with Egypt.
Wow. This
Yeah,
is
very
exciting
exciting.
times we're in, Patricia.
Yes,
Wow, for
for
sure.
sure.
Robert, let me bring you back in a second. We were talking Göbekli Tepe there. I meant to mention, I believe Klaus Schmidt is no longer with us. He has sadly departed us.
Yes, he died of a heart attack, I believe it was,
Wow.
but he died quite suddenly.
Yeah.
For those that don't know who Klaus Schmidt was, Herr Professor Dr. Klaus Schmidt was the lead archaeologist at Göbekli Tepe with the German Archaeological Institute, working with the Turkish government. I think the Ministry of Culture would be loosely translated into English. And yes, he died suddenly. It was quite unexpected. He made the comment 20-some years ago, or over 20 years ago, that he would spend the rest of his life there. And he did not mean, to die at such a young age. And indeed, there's probably more than another half century worth of excavation to do at Göbekli Tepe. Just as a side comment, the site is changing over time because it's being excavated. It's also being, when I say covered over, they're building sort of a roof-type structure over it. And you never know, a lot of these sites, whether it's Egypt is probably more stable right now, but Egypt or Turkey, a lot of these sites, they're always continually changing, not just in terms of the sites, but government authorities and what you're allowed to see, what's open to the public, what's not open, what we can get into, what we can't. So I generally recommend to people, whether it's Egypt, Turkey, or any other trip, if you want to go there, you have the opportunity to go. A trip is coming up that appeals to you. Take the opportunity. Don't be disappointed later. If things change.
How's that going to affect the present research then for the archaeology, Robert? Is it going to be handed over to somebody else, no doubt?
Yes, I don't know exactly what the situation is going to be in Turkey at this point. I mean, the Turkish government is very stable. I think the Şanlıurfa Museum, which is heavily involved in it, where a lot of the Göbekli Tepe artifacts are housed, the ones that they move away from site. And on the trip, one of the things we'll do is we'll go to the museum to see the artifacts there that go with Göbekli Tepe. It's only half an hour drive from the actual site. So I think everything will continue there. What is actually more interesting is getting back to Egypt for me personally is with what we'll call the regime changes, how things are going to sort out there. Because one thing that geophysicists, I worked with I'm a geologist and geophysicist. That's what my PhD is in. And I worked with the geophysicist Thomas Debicki in the early 1990s. And as you and some of the listeners may know, we found, and I'm convinced it's absolutely there, it's artificial chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx, which is now flooding, I'm certain, due to rising water tables. And for years, I've wanted to get back to do more work on that, ultimately to try to, if not excavate, at least get a camera into it, drilling into it. Was always refused by the Egyptian authorities, Zahi Hawass in particular. And now that maybe things are changing, maybe we'll be able to make some headway there.
Wow.
I just mentioned that as one project.
It's incredibly interesting times in Egypt with the dynamic has changed. And I think there's a freedom in the world now, and science has caught up with a lot of these ancient sites all around the world, Turkey, Egypt. I think maybe there's too much freedom and people are kind of losing the plot and just coming up with all sorts of radical ideas. I think we still need to keep our brains inside our head and not get too carried away. But
that's the thing. I mean, you always have to. There's not even that fine a line. You have to keep an open mind, and you have to be open to possibilities, and you have to look at the real evidence. That's what I try to go by. Look at the actual evidence that's there. And people can be very close-minded, in my opinion, on both sides. The classical Egyptologists, not to be too nasty, are certainly closed-minded, and they think they have all the answers, and they seem to be unwilling to look at evidence that's right in front of them in many cases. But then you can have the same problem on the other extreme.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Also, I wanted to mention before I forget it, because Gary was talking about, and Patricia was talking about Egypt and, all the virtues of Egypt. We can go on forever about that. I want to point out that I have never grown tired of Egypt. And some people who maybe maybe they've been to Egypt once or twice or 3 times, I would still encourage them to come with us. You always see new things. You'll get a new perspective, certainly with 3 of us traveling through Egypt. So don't feel that you should shy away from this trip just because you've been to Egypt once or twice or 3 times.
Sure, I've been 3 times myself, Robert. I'm captivated. I just can't get back enough. I'll be out there for Capricorn TV interviews in January, February, and possibly March as well. So we'll see you all out there.
Great.
But yeah, what a captivating place. I think it's a really exciting time. I did a good few shows with Robert Boval about the Zahi Was stuff, and I think it's good that Zahi's gone, but I don't know if it's going to change anything, Robert. Do you think that they're going to open the doors to, archaeology to more freedom, or?
I don't know. I mean, it's very hard for me to judge at this point. Maybe we'll get some insights when we're on the ground in Egypt in January.
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually was in Bulgaria with Robert Boval. You just mentioned Robert Boval. He and I spent a week in Bulgaria together this summer, looking at some ancient sites there. And yeah, we were talking about these types of things because, of course, he's Egyptian in the sense that he was born in Egypt and lived there a number of years, both in his youth and also later in his life as an adult. And of all the people, we couldn't figure out what to think ultimately.
Yeah.
The situation.
Well, fingers crossed. I think a lot of people would just like to have free reign in Egypt, but then you have to protect these monuments. These are incredibly precious monuments for all of mankind. So.
Yeah. I'd hate for something to happen. Patricia might want to comment on this, but I certainly have met Egyptians that, how should we say, don't have the same view of the monuments I do.
For sure.
Even to extremists who would treat the Egyptian monuments the same way that the Bamiyan Buddhas were treated in Afghanistan at one point. So,
sure.
There are diverse opinions, should we say.
Yeah. Robert, you're going to be speaking to CPAC too. What can we expect from you at CPAC?
Oh, I'll be talking about really the end of the last ice age. I'll mention Göbekli Tepe. I'll get into my Sphinx work because I find that if I don't talk about some of these things, then people come up to me afterward and say they wanted to hear me talk about that. I say, well, I've talked about this before, but I'll always give a brief summary of that. And then I'll get into some of my new research. I'm particularly interested in plasma and solar outbursts right now. Something I didn't get a chance to mention before is Easter Island fascinates me. My wife and I, Katie, my wife, and I have been to Easter Island a couple of times now, and something that really ties in with the whole end of the last ice age is the Rongo script.
Oh, yeah. It's similar to Mohenjo-Daro stuff as well.
With that, yeah, and how this, I believe, and my wife first discovered this, is probably a recording that's been passed down of what was happening in the ancient skies, literally what you would have seen. And it's interesting. I don't know if you've paid attention to it, but just recently we've had some major solar outbursts, some major solar flares, and a little coronal mass ejection. And even in the last few days, it's had some effect on communication, satellites, that type of thing, radio blackouts, and the aurora borealis.
Oh, yeah.
Has been at lower latitudes. Well, this is just a very, very slight version of what happened at the end of the last ice age, and also a slight version of what happened in 1859 with the Carrington event, and a very slight version of, I don't want to be a doomsayer, but what I believe will happen probably in the not too distant future. All the signs are indicating that. I also might get into, for instance, how electric fields, electromagnetic fields, which are quite closely related to sound fields that Gary was talking about, can affect our consciousness, may be one of the driving factors of changing world ages. I think that at this point, I was very skeptical about these things, 20, 30 years ago, but at this point, there's lots of good evidence beyond simply mythologies and legends that we have gone through major world ages, major, should we say, changes in consciousness. And I believe this can be tied back to actual physical parameters, cosmic cycles.
Oh, sure. Let me bring you in there a minute, Gary. I think it was on the Coast AM show, you talked about a TV production with Robert. Is that still going? Where are we at with that? You're going to talk about places of power?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Well, actually, that's what I've been working on over the last month, and it's coming together very nicely. So I'm in the process of setting some meetings up in LA next month.
Wow.
So yeah, we're going to go to see a few production companies with connections, let's say, to some of the major networks that would be suitable for it. And the premise of the show, where you've got this travel and seeing some of these ancient places, but also natural wonders, showing an understanding of what the sort of native peoples may have been doing and how they're interacting with the world, how we feel in these different places, but also using scientific equipment. So we're going to be measuring some of the natural forces. So I think it's going to give people a much greater understanding. We're going to focus on the continental United States to start with, possibly go over to Hawaii as well. And just show what's in people's backyards even, because obviously you're going to be going out to audiences that are local to a lot of these areas. In the initial season, I'm proposing we're going to cover about 15 states with these major sites that have got a few kind of close together. So yeah, Robert has very kindly been already given me some ideas. We spoke about it on Coast to Coast, because it is a lot about geology, the kind of minerals in the soil, the type of rocks, certainly the crystalline rocks, and where you get these telluric currents or sort of geomagnetism. These are some of the forces that we can measure. We're actually able to see that on the screen in the show. And these are also places where native peoples tell us that they did these kind of have these trance-like states, altered states of consciousness. The medicine man would go there. So we can have a look at that, the myths, and also because I have a sensitivity to these kind of sites, see what we can experience ourselves.
Wow, beautiful, Gary. I look forward to that. Patricia, do you want to finally wrap up anything before we go and wrap things up?
Well, only that we're really looking forward to an exciting adventure with, and that's Joseph and I, with Robert and Gary. And
wow.
Gee, if I start, I could go on for hours about what we're going to experience. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, listen, Patricia, nice talking to you. Just one or two questions for Robert and Gary before I go. Robert, I have a message from Stephen Mail. He wants to know about Samir Osmanovich. What do you make of Samir?
I'll be honest without trying to be nasty. Samir Osmanovich.
Yeah.
Can't even say it now. Samir Osmanovich is the person who is behind, should we say, the so-called Bosnian pyramids in Visoko. And he claims that there are ancient pyramids there, that they go back, 10,000 or more years. And there's, all this evidence of a megalithic whatever. Now, people don't want to hear this necessarily, but I think it's very important that we, as you mentioned, keep our critical analysis working as we look at ancient sites. So let me say before I make my comment that there's nothing more I would love to see than ancient pyramids in Bosnia. As I mentioned, I was in Bulgaria this summer with Robert Bouval, and we were finding not ancient pyramids, but certainly other very ancient structures that go back to a very remote period of time. So I have nothing personally against ancient pyramids in Bosnia, but you have to look at the actual evidence. And when I went to Bosnia and spent a couple of weeks looking at the actual evidence, I am not convinced that there are any ancient pyramids in Bosnia whatsoever. I am convinced that they are very interesting. If you want to call it geological anomaly, and these hills are, because of the tectonics of the area and the fault lines, etc., they're very regular, and there's interesting things going on, which ties in actually with what Gary was talking about. You can have very interesting and powerful places form naturally, if I could put it that way, but they are natural, and that is what is important. We're looking at natural structures there. We're not looking at artificial, human-made structures from ancient times. They are natural hills, and to be generous, he has mistaken natural hills for artificial structures. If I want to be non-generous, I could say other things, but I think I should leave it at that right now.
For sure. And of course, Robert, you've been to many places. You've been to, I think, Markawasi and what they call the Carpathian Sphinx. What do you make, maybe in a short summary, of Markawasi?
Markawasi is an incredible site in the Andes in Peru. The Carpathian Sphinx, as it's called, is in Romania in the Carpathian Mountains. And what you have there in both cases, let me focus on Markawasi, for instance. On the Markawasi Plateau is much more, I want to say, interesting and also ambiguous, because one could argue that some of the Markawasi structures, and likewise with the Carpathians, are simulacra, natural simulacra. That is, shapes that look as if they're faces, that look as if they're carved structures. It's very unclear, or could they be incredibly ancient sculptures? One thing you get about Markawasi is, and it actually applies to the Carpathians to a lesser extent, at Markawasi, you have all these structures on this one little plateau that look like different animals, that look like different faces, and they look like they're sculptures that are heavily, heavily, heavily weathered, which would suggest they're very ancient. In some cases, when I've gone there, I've thought that, okay, they sort of look like faces in sculptures. They might have started out natural, but they might have been modified, terraformed. People like to use that term sometimes, by ancient humans. One thing that is impressive about Markawasi is there are absolutely, without a doubt, ancient ruins on this plateau. So whatever is going on with these sculptures, ancient people were recognizing, they were building structures around them. There's no question about that. So there are ancient structures there. And there are these weird, I'll call them semi-sculptures, semi-simulacra. It's clearly, and I hate to use the term clearly, but you get that impression very, very strongly. It is a sacred site. It is a place where people went there in ancient times for rituals and ceremonies. You go there now, if you're not totally brain dead, if you're not totally spiritually inept, you will feel something there. I would say the same about Egypt. You know, to not be moved by some of the structures and sites and temples and the pyramids we'll be visiting in Egypt. There's got to be something wrong with you if you don't feel something. I don't care how skeptical you are. When you go into Luxor Temple, if you're not feeling something, there is something deeply wrong with you psychologically. When you go into a subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid, which I think is one of the most powerful spots, and if you're not moved, you know. So anyway, but my point is, and you know, people can be skeptical about this, and I'm a trained scientist, I'm a trained geophysicist, and I want to tie back in with Gary that some of this, I believe, there's actual physical basis for it. We are affected by very low energy, for instance, geophysical fields, electromagnetic fields. So some of this, even if you're very, quote, skeptical and materialistic, doesn't mean you have to dismiss everything, because there are real physical basis for it.
Wow, beautiful.
And came back to Schwaller. I mean, the mind and the spirit and the material and the spiritual realm are interconnected. So I don't want to go off on too many philosophical digressions, but it all ties together, in my opinion.
Robert, give us at your website there where people can follow your work, your books, and your tour.
Robert Schoch, and my last name is spelled S-C-H-O-C-H, so it's www.robertschoch, R-O-B-E-R-T-S-C-H-O-C-H, all one together, .com, C-O-M.
Wow, that's great.
And if you go there, you'll see links to the tours, including the Egypt tour, the Turkey tour, actually India tour. That's more than a year off. So, and connections to my books, etc.
Wow. What places are you touching in India? Will you go to Mohenjo-daro out that far, or?
Oh no, that's actually more Pakistan. Yeah, well, the whole itinerary is listed.
Wow. Wow.
So yeah, I'm very excited about that too. But first things first, Egypt and Turkey.
Wow, for sure. You got a busy year ahead of you, Robert.
Yeah, and then I teach full time at Boston University. I am a classic academic as well as being, some people would say, open-minded geologist, scientist.
I don't think you have enough hours in the day, Robert.
I know, I don't.
Wow. Well, listen, I thank you for your time today. I'm just going to finish up with Gary. Gary, give us out your website there for the Infinite Connections website.
Yeah, so infinite-connections.co.uk, and people can go to the tours tab and see all the details for the January and March tours. And I've also got the information about CPAC on there, so you can learn how to register and see all the speaker lineups. And of course, there's other tours coming up for 2015 I'm working on.
Oh, for sure. Well, I thank you for your time, Gary, and I appreciate the acoustics research you do. You've inspired me to look into different angles of it other than just pure science. But how did you get on with the Irish tour, by the way, Gary? Did you have fun?
Yes. Yeah, no, it went very well. Lots of very happy people at the end. And, we stayed in a castle in Ireland in Sligo, which was pretty magical. Mm-hmm. And, we had some great food. I mean, the cuisine in Ireland is definitely superior to England, shall we say. And, well, they're still, I'm still getting daily emails from the group of people that were with us. They're all chatting away. So I think they've made some new friends for life, which is what I'd always say these tours and also the conferences are great for. That we do meet like-minded people. Mm-hmm. That you never know where those connections can lead. So yeah, it's great to see made some new connections amongst the guests.
Sure. Well, I hope Ireland will be in one of your places of power, Gary, no doubt.
I'm working on a season that would include Ireland. Don't worry.
Okay. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Come and see you when the time comes.
For sure. Patricia, just give us out the Chematology website where people can follow the tours that you do in Egypt, which are, by the way, very unique and very empowering and very, very exhilarating.
Thanks, James. It's chematology.com, chemitology.com. And I also want to mention quickly that very soon, possibly this week, we're going to be releasing a video on the in-depth study that Muhammad Ibrahim and Yosef did on the Gosford Egyptian hieroglyphs located in a little bit north of Sydney in Australia. I went out there with Beatrice. We took many photographs of the place and brought them back to Yosef and Muhammad, who Muhammad is an expert. He's a teacher of hieroglyphs. And I'll give you a little teaser. We found them to be, we believe, close to 100% authentic.
Wow. Fascinating. I spoke to Evan Strong last night, actually, funny enough. I just tied in and hadn't spoken in a couple of months, so I think we might do a follow-up show soon. But all fascinating stuff, guys. Robert, Gary, and Patricia, I hope to see you for Capricorn TV in Egypt in the new year. But for now, thank you for your time today, guys. It's been a great chat. Robert, are you with me on the line?
I am. It's good to be back.
Wow, I think I've done 160 shows since I last spoke to you, Robert. A lot has changed in the world. But I think the last time, Robert, we spoke, you were going to go and do a tour in Göbekli Tepe. I guess tell us a little bit about the Göbekli Tepe tour, what happened last year, and I believe you're going to do it again this year.
We're going to do it again this year. Yes, I've been there, I want to say 4 times or so at this point, both for my research and taking people there. Those that are not familiar, my serious work on ancient cultures began in Egypt with the Great Sphinx. And this was very controversial, still is in some circles, very controversial that my geological analysis puts the Great Sphinx, or I would say the origins of the Great Sphinx, back to 10, 12,000 years, same time as Göbekli Tepe. I've been talking about this for 20-some years, but archaeologists, classical historians, and prehistorians, basically the status quo, they have a paradigm that no civilization, sophisticated culture, did not begin until about 3,000 BC, about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. So when I was talking about ancient Egypt and the Sphinx in particular being over 10,000 years ago, going back essentially to the end of the last ice age, I was just dismissed in my academic circles as, this was lunacy, this was crazy. Actually, I should say in the Egyptological historical circles, my fellow geologists familiar with it. Göbekli Tepe is an incredible ancient megalithic site in southeastern Turkey. It is arguably the oldest, or certainly one of the oldest megalithic sites we know. Certainly the oldest megalithic site where you have beautifully carved pillars. You have these pillars that weigh 10 to 15 tons, beautifully carved with reliefs of animals on them. And the bottom line is they form sort of Stonehenge-like circles, but they date back to 12,000 years ago, so the very end of the last ice age. The general consensus, although I'm not sure if it's correct, view of Stonehenge is it only goes back about 5,000 years. Göbekli Tepe goes back more than twice that, 12,000 years. So it's an incredibly important site for pushing back the origins of civilization, not just in southeastern Turkey, not just in Asia Minor, but from day one when I present, this always supported me because the geological evidence is very evident and definitive. So I started with the Sphinx. Göbekli Tepe is incredible confirmation of that. But one of and I'm making a very long story short, and people can read about more in my book, Forgotten Civilization. Sure. One of the big issues for everyone, including myself, is if there were these ancient civilizations before civilization was supposed to exist, going back to what we geologically refer to as the late ice age, before the end of the last ice age, what happened to these civilizations? In fact, a more pertinent and related question for me as a geologist is what happened to the entire world that caused the ice ages to end, to cause all these animals to go extinct, to cause these early civilizations to be devastated and essentially wiped out the entire world. So very important, very exciting. I have never lost my enthusiasm about it. And also when we go to Turkey, and we'll be doing that again this summer, we see a number of other sites. So we start in Istanbul and we work our way across Turkey looking at various ancient sites. And it just happens to be the route we take. Essentially, we start in Roman times and we push our way back to Göbekli Tepe time. So we span over 10,000 years of ancient history in Turkey.
Wow, beautiful, Robert, beautiful. I think it's one of the most exciting archaeological sites on the planet, and probably one of the most important because of the time frame that you mentioned, Robert. Let's tie it in with the book we discussed last time with solar outbursts and plasma and kind of where that all fits in.
Yeah, well, it all fits together. It ties in. I want to point out several things right now. Göbekli Tepe ties in with Egypt, and my work began in Egypt.